Conservative talk show host and now presidential candidate Larry Elder joins me now. Thanks so much for making the time.
Wyatt, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Perhaps I just want to begin with some breaking news that we've been following as it relates to affirmative action being struck down. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I anticipated this. Race-based preferences are unfair. They discriminate against merit. And even more interestingly, they discriminate against Asian Americans. In California in the 90s, we got rid of the use of race as a factor in admissions and colleges and universities. And many people then claim that the admissions for Blacks in the most competitive California state universities, UC Berkeley, UCLA, would go down. And it did. But overall admissions into all of the UC systems by Black and brown students remained the same. What happened is they were matched better with campuses where they could keep up. So a smaller number got into UC Berkeley and UCLA, but a greater number got into UC Davis, UC Irvine, and UC Riverside. And when they did studies going forward, they found that the graduation rates were higher because many students who get admitted into colleges are mismatched, are in colleges that are way too competitive. The pace goes too fast for them to keep up, and they drop out. So a disproportionately high percentage of Black and brown students were dropping out after they got rid of race-based preferences and students were better matched with their skills and campuses. The graduation rates actually went up. The other thing that happened, Wyatt, is that we found that the admissions of Asian Americans in the most competitive campuses, UCLA and UC Berkeley, went up, meaning they were discriminated against in favor of lesser qualified Black and brown students. So it's just completely, totally unfair. And when affirmative action or race-based preferences has been put to the voters, as was the case twice in California, and at least once in Michigan, the voters voted them down, even though California is a very, very left-wing state. Turns out people want merit. When you get on an airplane and you see a person of color or a female, don't you want to know whether or not this person is the best qualified to fly the plane as opposed to diversity, equity, and inclusion? So I think most people, from a common sense standpoint, want the best, want merit, and also feel that discrimination to fix past discrimination, and we know there was, remains discrimination.
And switching gears a little bit now to talk about your campaign itself for the presidency. Of course, you're running for president. You're running against a fairly large field of other contenders. Most notably, though, former President Trump is running and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Those seem to be, at least the general consensus, is the two with the highest amount of name recognition. Some would argue the two that have the greatest chance at actually becoming the nominee. It seems as if the target right now for a lot of the other campaigns is trying to get to the 40,000 threshold in terms of unique donors in order to make it on the first debate stage in Milwaukee. Are you confident that you'll be able to get there?
Well, first, I take issue with your statement that I'm running against Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis. I'm running in favor of being elected president of the United States. I'm running against Biden Harris. It is not my goal to criticize the fellow Republicans. Most of us pretty much know that the Biden administration has been rotten, has hurt the country on inflation, on gas prices, on its war against oil and gas, on porous borders. Most of us are pro-life. Most of us want to make sure that we have judges that follow Constitution in the Supreme Court. So I don't consider myself to be running against Trump or running against DeSantis. I am running for president. As for your question about getting to the 40,000 individual donors necessary to make the first debate in Milwaukee, we're on track to do that. I'm working hard to do it, but I do feel it's a bit onerous, especially Wyatt at this point in the campaign, where you would think the voters should winnow down the number of candidates, not the RNC. For example, in 2020, the Democrats required the debate candidates to have at least 1% in the polls, which we already have, or a certain percentage of individual donors, not both. For reasons that escape me, the RNC is requiring you to have 1% and a certain number of donors. So I think it's a bit onerous, but rather than complain about it, my goal is to work hard to get there, and I intend to do that.
And certainly, I mean, a lot of people are saying that it will limit the amount of candidates that will be able to be on the debate stage. I mean, if you get on the debate stage and perhaps in other forums as well, there's obviously, I'm sure, going to be a lot of important issues that you would look to bring up on the debate stage. But how do you make the conversation, as you said, about President Biden and about his wrongdoings, as opposed to focusing it on fellow Republicans, something you say you don't look to do?
Well, quite easy. I think during this long process, Wyatt, the Republican voters are going to realize that they need to coalesce behind somebody whose last name is other than Trump in order for us to win in November 2024. Why do I say that? Because so many swing voters in swing states despise Trump to the point where if he walked on water, they'd accuse him of not being able to swim. Now, I have no idea what to do about Trump derangement syndrome, which is what I call it, because I think most of the hostility is unfair. Maybe someday somebody will develop a vaccine. But until then, it presents a problem. And I've asked voters when I've been campaigning the following questions. Have you lost friends because of Donald Trump? I know I have. I have 3 friends I've known for an average of 40 years, and we can't even speak to each other now because of my support for Donald Trump. Are you walking on eggshells at work because of your support for Donald Trump? Do you have strained relations with family members and relatives because of Donald Trump? If the answer is yes, then Houston, we've got a problem. And that problem is called electability. And at some point, as I said, I believe the Republican voters are going to recognize they need to rally behind an individual with the America First agenda, Make America Great agenda, which I certainly have, that can pursue his policies, but for whom a sufficient number of swing voters in swing states will vote so we can win in November 2024. And when I get up there on that debate stage in Milwaukee, I'm going to make the case that I'm that person.
And just before we conclude, it's obviously a very big field, as we've both mentioned. Former President Trump, it seems, is the front runner, but just all of the candidates I've interviewed, I've confirmed this question with them. Would you be willing to get behind someone else if Donald Trump isn't the nominee?
Oh, absolutely. I've said that before. Whoever the Republican nominee is, I will support him or her and will campaign for him or her if asked to do so. But when I get up there, Wyatt, I'm going to be talking about some other things as well. And that is the lie that America is systemically racist. It's a murderous lie. What it does is cause, for example, the police, when you accuse them of being institutionally racist, they pull back. It's called the Ferguson effect or the George Floyd effect. Crime goes up, homicides go up, and the very people who are hurt are the very black and brown people that people on the left claim that they care about. The other thing that I want to emphasize is school choice. We have a crisis in urban education in our country, Wyatt. 13 public high schools in Baltimore where 0% of kids can do math at grade level, and another half a dozen where only 1% can. That's half of all the public high schools in Baltimore where either the kids are 0 proficient or only 1% proficient in math. In Chicago, there are 53 government schools. I prefer the term government school to public school. 53 government schools where 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. We need to have school choice where the money follows the child rather than the other way around. And Democrats are adamantly opposed to that because they are supported by the teachers union. And the teachers union is opposed to that. And then there's the 10,000-pound elephant in the room, Wyatt, and that is the epidemic of fatherlessness. 70% of Black kids now enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. 40% of all American kids today enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother, and that's about threefold what it was back in 1965. What's happened with our welfare state that was launched by the Democrats in the mid-60s? We've incentivized women to marry the government and incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. I am part of the baby boomer generation, Wyatt. And my generation is retiring or has retired. They're still young, they're still vigorous, and they have plenty of time on their hands. They've raised their own children, they are nurturing their grandchildren, so they have life wisdom. They should get involved. Every one of these kids who are growing up without a dad should have a male figure in his or her life, and I'm going to be encouraging people of my generation to get involved. The other thing we can do is direct the tax dollars that we're sending to the federal government for welfare programs to organizations, churches, houses of worship in our own neighborhoods that are doing the kind of mentoring that is necessary, sometimes going door to door to mentor kids who do not have a father figure in their home. So those are the kinds of things I'm going to be emphasizing. And to my knowledge, none of the other candidates are doing that.
Okay, we will leave it there. Presidential candidate Larry Elder, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Can I mention, go to elderforpresident.com, 40,000 individual donors, as we talked about, in order for me to be eligible for that debate stage in Milwaukee. And once I get up there, Wyatt, game on, hold my beer, although you're probably too young to drink.